During the 2 months before the COVID pandemic, I volunteered to coach a science Olympiad team. Mostly because I'm not very coordinated, so nobody would ever ask me to coach a sports team. My team was assigned epidemiology, and the timing on that was so crazy. The students on my team were studying the science and methods of tracking disease outbreaks just as we were about to witness one. We were totally prepared for Olympiad Day, and guess what? It was canceled due to a global pandemic. Here's what I got out of it, though. Aside from having just brushed up on epidemiology at the moment when I actually needed it at work, I learned how to interpret all the information that was coming at us, specifically how it was that epidemiologists knew what to expect and why they were making certain recommendations. Today, I'm interviewing Dr. Seema Shah, a disease investigator. Her team is one of many across the world that protect us from disease outbreaks. And I remembered this great story from history that reminds me that we have not always had the luxury of someone watching disease trends and finding ways to protect us when we don't even know what they have done for us. It started back in 1854. There was a severe outbreak of cholera that struck the Soho district of London, leading to numerous deaths in a very short period of time. At that time, the prevailing theory was that cholera was spread through something called miasma, or bad air. However, John Snow, a physician, had a different theory. He believed that cholera was waterborne, and to test his idea, he undertook a meticulous investigation of this outbreak. He mapped the cases in the area and plotted the location of deaths and noticed a concentration around a public water pump on Broad Street. He interviewed the local residents and asked about their water sources. He simply compared the number of cases of cholera between households that used the Broad Street pump and those that had other water sources, and he found a definite association with the water pump. He brought his findings to the local authorities and recommended removing the handle of the pump to block people from using it. And suddenly, of course, the number of cholera cases plummeted. As you would expect, if you know anything about the history of science, John Snow's work did not change anyone's opinion about disease transmission, but it did lay the groundwork for modern epidemiology. And that's where Dr. Shah and her colleagues come in. Epidemiology is the branch of medicine that studies patterns and causes for health and disease in a population of people. It's something that pediatricians like me actually do use in our daily practice. We think about the likelihood that a certain patient will have a disease based on their exposures, like where they live or go to school. And the reference books that we use to learn about conditions, they always include information about the epidemiology of a disease. For example, we doctors know that obstruction at the pyloric sphincter happens in babies in the first months of life and never after 6 months of age. So if a baby is vomiting, we think about this diagnosis, but we don't bother looking for it in a 4-year-old. That's kind of epidemiology. We use this information to help individual patients, but there are doctors and medical epidemiologists in every community that are gathering this information and keeping a watchful eye out for emerging threats. And I'm about to introduce you to one of these very cool doctors. I'm Dr. Wendy Hunter, and I'm the pediatrician next door. I'm that doctor friend you call for practical advice about your kids' health. I mix the science of medicine with the reality of parenting.
I am Seema Shah. I am the medical director for epidemiology and immunization services for the County of San Diego. Actually, right now, serving as the interim deputy public health officer. So a couple of different hats. I think I have probably the most fun job on the planet. I say that all the time. I have the coolest job. I get to do disease investigation, which I think is like the true looking for outbreaks, really looking out for the public's health and finding and understanding like what's happening and then getting to the source. And so you're truly like a detective. And the faster you get to it, the sooner that you can protect the public's health.
How do you identify an outbreak?
So, a lot of different ways. We kind of have our ear to the ground. Sometimes people are great about posting things to social media. We actually rely on people posting things like, I ate bad oysters at this restaurant. My entire family got sick. And then somehow it makes its way. Our communications team has always got their ear to the ground and say, hey, did you guys see this? Or our team is constantly in the background matching different pieces of data together. Like, that's unusual. We've gotten 3 complaints from Radies around people who have E. coli 0157 in 1 week. That is not normal. So let's put this together. In the interview process, we're asking a couple-hour interview and we're asking every single detail about what you ate, where you were, what kind of food, and we even go down to what grocery store do you go to. So we've picked up lots and lots of outbreaks just like that.
Do you monitor the results from the microbiology labs? I know last week I had 2 kids with salmonella.
So we do. So, that those are actually all reportable diseases by Title 17. Things like salmonella, not all E. coli. So E. coli 0157 would be. Shigella is reportable. And so those get automatically fed. So when you, as a pediatrician, are ordering a test, and again, every state and every jurisdiction is going to be a little different. But in California, for example, when you order a test and it shows up as Shigella or E. coli 0157, that gets automatically fed to your local public health department, and then we investigate based on that.
Title 17 is a section in the California Code of Regulations. Every state has something similar, and part of this section defines a list of diseases that healthcare providers, laboratories, even veterinarians are required to report. It includes things like tuberculosis and measles, as well as non-infectious illnesses like from pesticides, for example. It's all about controlling the spread of diseases and protecting the public. Health officials use this information to track diseases, identify trends, and to come up with ways to prevent spread. You know how you get that letter home from your daycare that says someone in your child's classroom has lice? Or recently, I've seen a few letters home that a child had whooping cough in the school. Those are formal policies that the schools have that they need to notify parents. But behind the scenes, our public health department is doing a similar thing. Instead of monitoring their students, all the local labs and doctors' offices are monitoring the people in our city. One of the reportable diseases is a particularly pathogenic strain of E. coli called 0157, which is notorious for causing severe foodborne illness. This bacteria produces a potent toxin known as shigatoxin, which can lead to symptoms like severe stomach cramps, bloody diarrhea, and in some cases, it can cause more serious complications like hemolytic uremic syndrome, which can be life-threatening. It's such a scary name that we doctors, we don't like to call it by its real name. We call it by its nickname, HUS. HUS can affect the blood in the kidneys, as well as other organ systems. Shigatoxin destroys red blood cells, and then waste products can build up in the kidneys and cause kidney failure, among other horrible things. We don't have antibiotics that just kill this bacteria, but we do have lots of treatments that can help kids who get really sick from this. This is a disease that makes us doctors really nervous and can be somewhat prevented by good hygiene and safe food handling. I'm talking to Dr. Seema Shah, a pediatric emergency medicine physician, now the medical director of epidemiology and immunization services for the County of San Diego. I asked Dr. Shah what interesting outbreaks she has dealt with in kids recently and what we can learn from them. Here's what she shared.
I think the one that has struck me is really the salmonella raw milk outbreak that we had here in San Diego. And I was actually on the CDC website, and they actually have some testimonials from parents, who have had lived experiences of kids who have gone through this. But we detected a raw milk outbreak. And what was interesting to me is that the number of parents that give kids raw milk. And in this outbreak early on, we detected a type of Salmonella typhimurium, and it started to pop up. And in our interview process, we found a bunch of kids that were showing up with Salmonella. And then in that, our team discovered that they all had been taking raw milk or had been drinking raw milk. And so we immediately, put out a press release and actually pulled all the products from shelves because so many kids had been sickened, and actually two had already been hospitalized as a result. So that actually grew to throughout California. So there, I think in the end, ended up being like 169 cases, and majority of them, I think the average age was 7, which again speaks to the number of kids that are getting, and I'm sure the number was even higher than that, right? It's those that actually sought healthcare. What's interesting about raw milk is that it's not FDA regulated. You can actually, and apparently 3% of Californians can drink or actually drink raw milk. Like it was something that I didn't, I don't think I ever thought about it. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician. I don't think I ever thought to ask.
Right.
It's a growing movement of people that like to give their kids raw milk and not realizing the risks that are associated with it.
I saw a patient yesterday. It was an 11-day-old, and their cord hadn't come off yet. And so the umbilical cord smelled really bad. And the parents told me that their chiropractor told them to put something like golden seal or something powder on the umbilical cord. And they asked me if it was okay. I can't remember the exact word, but I Googled it in the room, and there were like 40 hits immediately about infections of the umbilical cord caused by applying this powder. So I can see how these things can happen and parents don't know. I don't know.
Well, and I think that there's this perception that, and we're seeing it again with H5N1, right? With highly pathogenic avian influenza. They're touting this as like hey, if you ingest or if you drink raw milk, you're going to have antibodies to fight H5N1. And it's like, actually, no, because by the time you ingest anything, number one, it's all going to be destroyed anyway. But no, the risk benefit makes no sense because you're more likely to become sick from and ingest some bacteria and get sick and have some horrible consequence than have any benefit to it.
Can you describe what it looks like when a kid gets some of these foodborne illnesses, the gastrointestinal issues, and is it just vomiting and diarrhea, or it can be more?
Great question. I think that having seen a pretty wide spectrum, right? You can have minimal illness, just a mild illness, meaning vomiting, diarrhea, but you can see the extremes, right? You can see severe vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration. Some of them are completely altered. They can be jaundiced because they have a multi-organ failure, meaning their kidneys have shut down, their pancreas has shut down, their liver has shut down. They are actually having difficulty clotting, right? It's really can be a horrific, almost septic-like picture. And so there can be this wide range, unfortunately. In recent, we have had kids that have had that extreme, right? So I think that this perception that gastrointestinal illness is just, a mild norovirus like just vomiting and diarrhea, I think is just a huge misconception and really can have that severity of hemolytic uremic syndrome like picture where kids have to go on dialysis and unfortunately, can actually lose the function of their kidneys. And we have had deaths associated with this. So it's really kind of an unfortunate situation.
I do imagine that parents in the United States sort of take these things for granted. You imagine there are kids in other countries who die of dehydration, and we think, oh, the risk of drinking raw milk or something like that, my child getting sick, we've got a medical system that they can fix it. They can give them IV fluids. But yeah, really, we can get behind the 8 ball and kids can get quite ill where we're supporting them and just hoping for the best, right?
Yeah. And I would encourage you to go to the CDC website where they actually talk about, they share the testimonials for the mom who gave actually raw goat milk to her child who developed HUS. And she talked about how her child was never normal again after her HUS experience. And basically suffered from PTSD, her 9-year-old daughter, and really just complained about body aches all the time and just she could not recover her child back again. So really just a sad situation, I think, and sad experience.
These kinds of devastating outcomes from foodborne illness are quite rare, partly because we have systems in place, entire buildings of people watching our backs and looking for dangerous exposures to protect us from and by preventing outbreaks. Sometimes it's our own behavior that puts us at risk, exposing ourselves to a risk that we didn't realize existed, like in the case of raw milk. Parents thought they were doing the healthiest thing for their children. Other times, it's an unlucky event in which an infection jumps from an animal to a human host. That's called spillover, and we'll talk about that in the next episode. Or an infection is spread from food handlers. If this episode freaked you out just a little, be sure to follow the show and listen to the next episode when Dr. Shah talks about the surprising ways that they monitor for disease, like testing our wastewater and spraying insecticides to prevent mosquito-borne diseases. And remember, epidemiologists need your help. They actually want you to post on social media about your ailments, and they are reading your posts. You never know if your weird rash or diarrhea might be the key to identifying and solving an outbreak. For more from the Pediatrician Next Door, find me on the web at pediatriciannextdoorpodcast.com. If you've got a question about the weird things kids do, send an email to hello@pediatriciannextdoorpodcast.com for a chance to hear your voice on the show. I'm Dr. Wendy Hunter, and I'm the Pediatrician Next Door. This show is produced by Red Rock Music. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever it is you're listening. I'll be back next time with more.